everybody around the world. This is the Society for Caribbean Linguistics very first virtual conference. We would have met this year in Trinidad and Tobago, the land of steel pan, limbo, and land of the hummingbird, and we would have been meeting this very week. But we all know because of COVID-19, we've all got to get creative, and it's actually nice that our conference theme was to have been Caribbean linguistic heritage and digital initiatives. So moving fully into the digital space, SCL is having our virtual conference over these next 2 days, the 6th and the 7th of August, 2020. And we're very proud and pleased to host two past presidents as our plenary speakers. We have other activities that we posted up on Facebook, such as poetry in different Caribbean languages. So we are definitely focusing on our Caribbean linguistic heritage with our feature speakers and as Caribbean languages live and in living color. So just to tell you a little bit about our speakers, Professor Peter A. Roberts is well known to all of us. And Professor Roberts is Professor Emeritus of the UWI, serving at Cave Hill for many years and continuously attached to his alma mater for over 50 years. He's the author of several books, including West Indians and Their Language, From Oral to Literate Culture, CXC English, Roots of Caribbean Identity, and the most recent one, A Response to Enslavement. The last two books are actually prize-winning books. The Roots of Caribbean Identity was the co-winner of the Caribbean Studies Association Book Prize for 2008. And the most recent book was the Independent Publishers 2020 Bronze Medal winner for World History. Professor Roberts is also co-author of Writing in English, a course book for Caribbean students. He was visiting professor in Afro-American Studies at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, a senior Fulbright fellow at the John Carter Brown Library, Brown University, senior fellow Rockefeller Caribbean 2000 Project, and with a lot of supporters and fans tuning in right now from Puerto Rico, from Rio Piedras. Everybody's waving their Puerto Rican flag for Professor Roberts. And he's been president for the 1990-1992 biennium. Professor Roberts is also co-founder of our very, very important Islands in Between conference that came out of the University of Puerto Rico and the University of the West Indies at Cave Hill. He was also Dean of the Faculty of Arts and General Studies. So Professor Roberts is gonna talk to us today about it's a personal reflection of Caribbean field linguistics, his life as a scholar. So I just want to welcome everybody around the world, from Hong Kong to parts of Europe, to parts of North America, South America, the Caribbean, Africa, all over the world. And for those of you joining us on YouTube later on. So here's wishing us a wonderful time. So on behalf of the Society, I as president, Sylvia Cowenberg as immediate past president, Joyce Ferreira as vice president, Clive Forrester, secretary, Joseph Farquharson, publications officer, Renee Zuniga as treasurer, and our two executive officers, Cora Belgrave and Sandra Evans. Welcome one and all, and I turn you over to our moderator, our secretary, Clive Forrester.
All right, thank you, Joanne, and welcome to the viewers on Facebook. Thank you for tuning in. We might give you a chance to join in live at the question and answer section. So please wait until the end. You'll definitely want to wait until the end, just in case you get a chance to appear live on our first virtual language festival for the Society for Caribbean Linguistics. So the procedure for the plenary discussions this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining from, we'll have our first presenter, Dr. Peter Roberts, who will do his presentation for roughly about 35 minutes, after which Dr. Daidrah Smith-Telfer will have her discussant section for 15 minutes. Dr. Smith-Telfer will reply to Dr. Roberts. They've both done quite a bit of research in the field, in the bush of Guyana, in the case of Daidrah, and all over in the case of Dr. Roberts. Then we'll have a presentation from Dr. Lise Weiner, who will also have 35 minutes. and Dr. Joseph Farquharson will respond to her for 15 minutes as well. They'll both be talking about challenges in Caribbean lexicography. I imagine Dr. Weiner will be taking a kind of historical approach, looking up until the point we have now. And I imagine Joseph will talk about some of the challenges that he has faced compiling a dictionary for Jamaican digitally. At the end of the discussion section there, we'll go right into a general question and answer from the public, and we'll have that for 10 minutes. At that point, we'll permit persons who are watching, if they'd like to join in live on Zoom, to do so. So if you have a Zoom account, keep it open, and we will share the details to join as soon as we get to that section in the program. All right, so over to you, Dr. Roberts. I'm going to unmute your mic right now. So you are live. Go right ahead.
Okay. Good morning or day or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I hope I can manage all this technology. I take it as an honor to be given a virtual plenary on the occasion of this unusual SCL biennial meeting, especially since the Society of Caribbean Linguistics is a society with which I've had a close connection from its early years. My topic is field research and the formation of a linguist, a personal reflection. Let me thank the organizers, and especially Clive Forrester, for his work facilitating this presentation. This presentation is a simple talk. I don't have many pretty pictures to show you or slides to bamboozle you. I will start at the year 1976 as a significant year to give you some idea of the people and times. After which, I will go back 7 years earlier when I started field research as a graduate student. It was in August 1976 that the first SCL meeting was held in Guyana. And as you will see from some of the participants that I will try to show you now, I hope I can succeed in this. You have Professor LePage, Richard Alsop, Professor Cassidy, Dennis Craig, and Derek Bickerton. And then below you have Professor Aline. All of them were there at that meeting in '76, except Professor Aline. He was missing, probably because in those days, he preferred to chart his own path rather than follow others. And there were one or two leading people in the formation of the SCL that he did not necessarily see eye to eye with. However, he was always in the SCL in spirit and was at one time the president. The participants came from all across the Caribbean, Britain, France, the United States, and there was also one from Nigeria. Although many of the stars of this first conference are no longer with us, it is good to know that their legacy is being preserved. And more importantly, the society is in good hands and is able to adapt to these very unusual times by having this virtual dissemination of papers with interaction. 1976 was before the age of modern fancy computers and the internet. And the conference organizers, under the leadership of George Cave of the University of Guyana, collected copies of papers submitted and bound them in a volume. I still have my volume. Some of the people on the list, plus Professor Aline, who were in 1976 my UWI colleagues, had actually been my teachers, supervisors, or examiners just a few years before. On the other hand, I will show you now two people. Let's see. You have Ian Robertson on the left, who was also there at the conference, was my fellow Irvinite at Mona, who had graduated with me in 1969. And John Rickford, who was also there, was also a youngster at the time. Doesn't look so in a way. The formation of the SCL, the first conference a few years thereafter, may seem now like the start of a linguistics movement in the Caribbean. But it was actually a mature stage in the development of language studies, especially Creole language studies, with the UWI providing the major institutional framework. In 1959, a conference on Creole languages had taken place at Mona. In 1968, a bigger international conference was also held at Mona. The first transformational analysis of a Creole, done by Beryl Bailey, was published in 1966. And I will now try and show you Beryl Bailey. Yeah, that's Beryl Bailey there. So, 1976 was, as I said, a mature stage, for by that time, the UWI was well on its way to providing a full degree program in linguistics at the undergraduate level. Now to go back to my field research and my formation as a linguist. In a sense, I was at the tail end of a tradition which involves the kind of visits to exotic places that had produced missionaries, anthropologists, and linguists in the United States and elsewhere. In American missionary tradition, knowing a community's language was seen as a way to get to understand other people, introduce the Bible to them, and convert them to Christianity. Neither Pike and Smalley, whose textbooks were widely used in linguistics, belonged to that tradition. As to anthropologists who were not missionaries, they were helping to promote understanding of other societies. In 1966, William Labov, and let me show you what Labov looks like. William Labov established sociolinguistics with his social stratification of English in New York City. And Basil Bernstein in England had around the same time thrown his elaborated and restricted codes into the mix. Now, elaborated and restricted codes, that was actually based on research in England. These academics all believed that they were helping to change value judgments in society, as well as to improve formal and informal language education. Linguistics, therefore, from the middle to the last quarter of the 20th century, was a very vibrant, practical academic field of endeavor. This was even more so because Noam Chomsky, and I will show you Chomsky now. Noam Chomsky was beginning to make his mark on linguistics. That's on the right-hand side. Although syntactic structures came out in 1957, and aspects of the theory of syntax in 1965, the behaviorists at Harvard were still holding sway throughout the 1960s because B.F. Skinner's Verbal Behavior also came out in 1957, and Skinner is on the left-hand side. However, the power struggle between the behaviorists and the innatists, which was played out in Cambridge, Massachusetts, between Harvard and MIT, diminished as the innatists ascended to the throne of linguistics. As Chomsky unobtrusively took his place on the throne, and as many tourists passed through MIT to see where the big giant was, armchair linguistics with concocted sentences like colorless green ideas sleep furiously began to supersede field linguistics, much to the chagrin of Robert Hall Jr. and early American Creolists. Competence and the ideal speaker era were far more fashionable than performance and actual people. There were almost as many tree diagrams in the LSA papers in those days as trees outside. For me, I did not have much choice in the matter. For like a good student, I had to know past, present, and future. But don't think that I didn't like Chomsky, quite the contrary. He was just as much a key to racial equality as some in politics and sociology. He tells you right from the beginning not to look at the differences between human beings, but to look at their sameness, with language being the most critical element, being the same for all human beings. My supervisors at UWI, those schooled in the past, were aware of what was going on internationally and were also part of the 1960s national independence movements in the Caribbean. They were part of the UWI as the light rising in the West, and they were also supporters of West Indies cricket on its way to ascendancy. The Caribbean was also becoming a respectable part of academia, and Creole language studies were a part of this. To give you some idea of the early rise of the Caribbean in academia, and also to show you how I was at the tail end of a tradition that was put in jeopardy by the rise of armchair linguistics, I will just mention 3 researchers, not linguists, who featured the Caribbean in their work in the early half of the 20th century and improved the image of the Caribbean internationally. Melville Herskovits from Northwestern University did his research on language and culture in the 1930s in Suriname and Haiti, and 1947 in Trinidad. His Life in the Haitian Valley, film study 1934 and book 1937, and his Myth of the Negro Past, 1941, debunked ideas that Africans had not contributed culturally to the Americans. Catherine Dunham, while at the University of Chicago as an anthropology student and having been influenced by Herskovits, went in the 1930s to Martinique, Haiti, and Jamaica to do her own field research. In 1936, she completed her master's thesis, The Dances of Haiti, Their Social Organization, Classification, Form, and Function. She then went on to revolutionize American dance with the Dunham technique based on her field research on Caribbean people, influenced people like Alvin Ailey in New York and Rex Nettleford in Jamaica. Elsie Clues Parsons, and I will show you a picture of her. That's her there as Cruz Parsons. Is not in the celebrated category of the previous two, but her collection of stories, folklore, riddles, proverbs, and sayings from throughout the Antilles in the 1930s provides up to now a rich source of material for further research. So, when I started my research degree in linguistics at the UWI at the very end of the 1960s, it was 30 years after the big names and the ripples they had made in the linguistic and cultural water. It was also in the midst of social ferment, as well as political upheaval caused by the Vietnam War and the Black Power movement. Specifically for me as a graduate student in linguistics at the UWI, it meant being directed to visit a place with an unresearched Creole language and deciding on a topic. Before me, there was just one person who did a research degree in linguistics at the UWI. And I will show you that person now. The person in whose big footsteps at Mona I followed was Lawrence Carrington, who did his research on French Creole in St. Lucia. And he has big footsteps in different ways because he's very tall. What you should realize right away is that at the end of the 1960s, there was no explicit structure set out for a degree in linguistics, undergraduate or graduate, at the UWI. What there was to make up for that at the graduate level was what I would call an informal system of apprenticeship under able master craftsmen and women. However, there were specific UWI developments that took place around the time I started out on my master's. And one of them was the coming into being of what was called the Senate Subcommittee for Linguistics. And at the same time, the university also got a Ford Foundation grant. The Senate Subcommittee for Linguistics at that time controlled all linguistics teaching and research on all three campuses of the university. As the paper says, the Senate Subcommittee for Linguistics was really the first formal academic structure dealing with teaching and research in linguistics for all three campuses of the UWI. I was at Mona at the time, having just finished my undergraduate degree, and those in charge there decided that they would send me off to Grenada to do research on Grenadian French Creole. My supervisor was Dr. Gertrude Busher, and I will show you a picture, not a very good picture of her, but I will show you a picture of her. That is her there. I was very familiar with her, and she skillfully guided me through my first stint at research work and the necessary theoretical and bibliographical background to complete the degree. I must say that although my undergraduate experiences in Jamaica and elsewhere had moved me far beyond my comfort zone in 1960s Barbados, being sent off to Grenada moved me even further. I knew very little about Grenada. I knew very little about French Creole in Grenada, and I knew very little about doing field research in linguistics. However, the people who were sending me obviously thought that this was something I could handle. So I had to live up to their expectations. Thus, armed with a UWI portable reel-to-reel tape recorder, I set off for Grenada. Yet I cannot say I was like Columbus, operating in total ignorance and creating myths, for I was a product of the Caribbean. Even though the Grenada national budget in that year had remarkably provided for a patois tutor, French Creole in Grenada was not a vibrant everyday language, and I had to search diligently for patois speakers. My finished thesis, the verb in Grenadian French Creole, was like all other approved theses put in the UWI libraries at the time. It was a result of goodwill on the part of many Grenadians and direct help from De Vere Pitt and others, many of them now dead. I always have to single out Julia Frederick, an old lady from Riversally, who was always glad to see me and to tell me in French Creole about her life. And I was very happy to listen to her and learn from what she had to say. She had moved between Grenada and Trinidad and confessed with pride that when she was young, she liked to fight. And she used the word gourmet, which I remember up to now. One day, she asked me, Barbade peut à Londres, which means, is Barbados near to London? Although I told her no, her question caused me to wonder and to think about her conception of the world, about colonialism and many other things. My field experience in Grenada is not anything that could be gained from reading books or captured in a thesis. I was young at the time and operating on my own. This was Grenada before the revolution, when you landed at Pearls Airport and you traveled in left-hand drive open buses. Let me just show you this now. So you have open bus on the right, Pearls Airport in the middle, and the great Mr. Geary on the left there. I walked a lot and learned to sit and listen respectfully to old people talking without pushing a microphone in their face. I came to understand a little more the differences and similarities of the islands. I saw leaders close up. I remember going to a small storytelling session at the governor's house, that was Dame Hilda Bino, and also being at the opening of a community center by Mr. Geary. And that was a lesson in politics. I listened to old men, glad for the opportunity to sit and tell Nancy stories in French Creole while they drank rum slowly. I recorded various people. I don't remember anyone asking me for money, probably because I didn't look as if I had any in any case. The passage of time may be virtually unnoticed, but the changes that take place can be very dramatic. I played one of these tapes for students at St. George's University a few years ago, and they had no idea that the speakers were Grenadians in Grenada. After I returned from Grenada, In order to fortify my theoretical knowledge of linguistics, the Senate subcommittee sent me off to Columbus, Ohio, to do the Linguistic Society of America's Linguistic Institute. And there I saw and heard some of the big names in linguistics at the time. My trip to Ohio State University took place just a few weeks after the Kent State University student massacre in May 1970, when the Ohio National Guard shot and killed students who were taking part in a peaceful protest against the Vietnam War.
Just a quick point out, Dr. Roberts, you have about 5 minutes left, 6 minutes left in this segment.
Okay, all right.
Right, I'm watching the time here. All right, thanks.
I did not go far from the campus at Mona to do the research for my PhD degree. But where in Grenada, I was coming to understand Caribbean language from older people. In Jamaica, I was learning from young children of contrasting social backgrounds. I was actually part of the Caribbean language research program directed by Dennis Craig. Craig's Caribbean research program was executed at 3 schools: Hope Tavern Basic School, Mona Prep, and Mona Heights Primary. These are 3 very different schools, but ideal to look at maturational, behavioral, and social class differences. The children at Hope Tavern Basic School were normal children. They exhibited typical cognitive and language characteristics. Mona Prep was at the time, and probably still is, a private, sophisticated, academically successful, expensive primary school for middle and upper class children. Mona Primary was a free government primary school, so had children predominantly of working class parentage. The research activity in the school was done in the open air, but away from disturbance. 3 children at a time were taken out of their classroom and put to sit outside at a rectangular table fitted with tape recorders at 3 sides. I sat at the other side. The children sat in ample armchairs jammed up against the table so that they could not move from their seat easily. I asked them all questions for a short time, and then I told them I had to go and talk to the teacher, leaving them alone to talk among themselves. I returned after a time, and after asking them a few more questions, I let them go back to the classroom. I was old enough at the time to be regarded as a respectable adult by them, and they immediately knew from my speech that I was not Jamaican, factors which could have caused them to speak to me more formally. A comparison of Hope Tavern and Mona Prep children showed maturational, social class, and behavioral differences. A comparison of Mona Primary and Mona Prep showed social class and behavioral differences. A comparison of Hope Tavern and Mona Primary showed maturational differences. All of the children showed variation in register to some extent. Now, if you check, you will see the first paper in the SCL Occasional Paper Series 1974 was a speech of young Jamaican children. This is a transcription of the speech of the Hope Tavern children I interacted with in the project. Now, why have I told you all this? To give you some idea of my thoughts in my retirement years when I was invited to be virtually present at an upgrade seminar for a linguistics student at Cave Hill just a few weeks ago. This was a bright student doing an applied linguistics project. What I noted first and foremost is the difference between the preparation of a linguistics student today and my preparation 50 years ago. I was fortunate as a student that I was always full-time. So I had a lot of time to do academic work. Students today do not necessarily have these advantages, especially at the graduate level. And more generally, the UWI has to cater for a greater number of students who enter the university prepared in different ways. However, students today can start linguistics from their very first year at the university. They do undergraduate courses which introduce them to a wide range of areas in linguistics. As such, they are much better prepared than I was when I started graduate work. In addition, they can do a research project in their final year.
So we're just about out of time, Peter.
All right.
We're just about out of time in this segment, so I'll give you another 2 minutes.
All right.
And then we move into the discussion.
Sometime in the future, people may look back and say that COVID-19 brought about great changes in education. However, it is for those of you today who are in the driver's seat to lead in bringing about these changes, to shape conferences, to innovate in teaching and research work, to interact with all kinds of people in the interest of your community and your people. Then the 2020s will become a vibrant time for linguistics and many other disciplines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roberts. We're going to move right into the discussion segment with Dr. Telfer. You know, she has had her experience in the field as well, and I'd like her to just respond to some of the points that Dr. Roberts has raised.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Roberts. I can see some similarities there. It seems as if you and I did what is commonly referred to as lone wolf field work. So we went in by ourselves to do all the recordings, etc. Do you think that is something that we should continue to encourage in our Caribbean setting, or do you see a need based on what your experiences were, what challenges you faced in the field alone? Do you think you would have benefited from going in with at least another person or as a team to help you throughout the process?
Well, personally, I prefer to work alone, so I can only answer for myself. But if you're asking me a general question whether we should have a team, I suppose a team may be better for some people in that you can feed off the other person's thoughts and experiences, and you will be able to benefit better in that way. But as I said, I prefer to work alone. I have always preferred to work alone.
Okay, all right. Going back to your experience in Grenada, the speakers were not easy to locate. How did you go about finding your speakers? And did you experience any kind of pushback when you went in to collect your data?
Fortunately, I knew there was a girl who had graduated from Mona and went back home not long before I went to Grenada. So I knew her. So she was working in one of the ministries. So I spoke to her first, and she directed me to Dr. Pitt. He wasn't Dr. Pitt at the time. And Pitt, like, he was more keen on these platform speakers than I was. So he took me all over the place looking for them. And we sat and we listened. But then I in addition to that, I had to travel by bus in different parts. So in a sense, I found somebody who could direct me to other people.
Okay, it's a similar experience. I think that it's one of the kind of preparatory work that has to be done for any kind of field work to ensure that you have some kind of inside link within the community. Otherwise, you might find yourself in there not knowing where to go or what to do. So that has to be taken into account when you're planning your field work as well. Now, in terms of, because one of the things that I recognize in my experience is that, yes, there is the field element, there's a data collection element, but field work, especially when you're working with certain groups also, and maybe it's from just my perspective, but it involves the heart. There is quite a bit of emotions that can be attached to the overall fieldwork, keeping contact with the community. Did you keep in touch with the community after leaving? And did you have any kind of, what were your experiences in terms of emotional investment?
Emotional investment. That's a good phrase. As I said, I learned to sit and listen respectfully to old people and to what they said, because you can learn a lot that way. Within more recent years, I have been back in Grenada, and I have shared a lot of what I did with them, and they're very grateful for my research. So right now in Grenada, there is a committee that is looking to promote French Creole, and I work with them as best I can to help them out. Between the recent and all those years ago, I can't say that I did a lot in terms of attachment, but I always had a love for Grenada. So in that sense, it is something that grew on me from that time when I set off and I didn't know exactly what I was going to meet. My experiences were positive. And Grenada has always remained very favorable in my heart.
Okay, lovely. I find, well, based on my experience, trust was one of the key issues, because I think persons within, by the way, I worked among Lokono speakers in Guyana, so in Arawak communities. And one of the first things that I realized that had to be done was to build trust with the speakers for them to want to communicate with you and keep speaking with you, invest their time, etc. Once that was established, then they basically welcomed you as a member of the family. So it's one of the key things that also has to be a part of fieldwork, establishing that trust, because it's after that has been established that many of them will open up. You'll have some who are more open, and then you mentioned the issue of money, that nobody asked you for money because it looked as if you didn't have any. For the most part, that was the same for me, but I found that there were a few persons who felt like, if you're coming in to take something that belongs to me, then you ought to pay, right? And it's after having a discussion, explaining what the intentions are, that will change. So that's a difference that I can identify there.
Well, one thing that I can say is that Dr. Pitt was very key in this, like a broker like me, because he was well known in Grenada. And when I met up with him and he introduced me to these people, I was then riding on his goodwill among the people. So I didn't have any problem. And in any case, I don't really talk a lot, as most people who know me know. I would listen a lot. So I was just there sitting down listening, and he was carrying on, and they were drinking their rum and so on. So I was not really intrusive in a lot of it. except for the old lady. The old lady would talk to me, and she liked to see me come because she liked to talk, and she liked to tell me about her youth and so on.
Okay. Funding at the time, because I think that is also an issue that we face now. At the time, did you think you were properly funded? You went in with enough to keep you going?
I can't say that any time during my graduate or undergraduate years, I ever had any problems with money.
That is lovely.
The university paid for the trip and they paid for it, and I mean, I could eat every day and I could move around, and I really wasn't looking to do any big things. So I didn't really have any problem. It's not anything that I remember that I was at my wit's end as to how to manage this or that. That didn't happen to me. And I think the university did well at that time to the administration of it, because I didn't really have to do anything in terms of money and such.
Okay. Because I guess because of now the increase in the number of students who want to pursue field linguistics, among other factors, that money has become an issue. And so you find that even if you're going into the field, you have to be very strategic about it, and you have to think of ways that you can supplement whatever grant that you might get. And knowing people is important. I remember I was in the field and I thought I was prepared. I had my video camera, my voice recorders. Professor Robertson was the one who went with me that first time into the field, stayed with me a bit to try to help me to get settled. And then he went back to Trinidad. And along the way, my video recorder stopped. Luckily, Professor Robertson's son lived in Guyana at the time and was able to assist me there, because you never know what challenges might pop up. And the reality is now that we're relying more on video recorded data than just audio. So you want to ensure that you have that. So having that, those links in the country that you're doing your research in is important. May I ask, how long did you stay in Grenada that first time? You remember?
I remember that about a few weeks.
Okay. And the focus, because I guess it depending on what you're studying, the time period that you spend in the field will differ. Mm-hmm. Because you were focused more on sociolinguistic studies?
No. I was doing more. What I did was more descriptive. I was looking at the verb in Grenadian French Creole. So
okay,
descriptive linguistics, more of that.
Okay. And you found that you were able to gather enough data in that time?
I went back another time.
So repeat visits. Mm-hmm. Were important then, and I found that it's also important now as well, because you might leave the field and realize that in going through that you would need some additional data, so you go back. I want to ask you, I think we're almost out of time. I want to ask you one final thing. Well, it's more of a comment than asking you a question. You mentioned that you went back afterwards to share some of the work that you did with the community. And I think that is something that is important in field linguistics, because many of these communities do not have any documentation, much documentation of their own work. And I think that it is honorable to give back share that information with the community when you do leave the field. So it's something that I am also working on doing. So I admire that you did that after you went in. Clive, we're out of time. Okay, we have 2 minutes. I want to talk to you. You talk about the preparation of students today and back then. But what I want you to say something about is those field experiences that you had. How do you think they help to shape you as a linguist? And do you think that every linguist should have some kind of field experience?
Well, it depends on what kind of linguistics you're doing. As I said somewhere in the talk, when armchair linguistics came in, there was no need anymore to go out there and do anything. And even if you take what Beryl Bailey did, Beryl Bailey actually did research work, I think written kind of thing that she got from questionnaires. But if you look in the book, you will see that what she did was to extract pure Creole from everything else. And that is not very different from Chomsky's ideal speaker hero idea, what she did with, so it depends on what kind of linguistics you prefer. I mean, you can't tell people what to do. If you're interested more in sociolinguistics and I suppose applied linguistics, you definitely have to interact with the people that you hope to serve or deal with. You definitely have to. I don't see how else you can do it. So, for example, if you're going to be doing things to help children in schools, you have to know what a school is. You have to know the children in the school. You have to have some idea what the teachers do in the school. You have to have some idea of, and this might sound facetious to you, but there are people who do things without actually any experience whatsoever or very little. So as I said, there are some kinds of things that you definitely have to have field experience. As to whether students today should go through what I went through. I mean, for me, this was a rich experience, very, very rich experience. But the thing today is that the university has to cater to all sorts of students. It is a public university. And you really can't be singling out. You don't have enough money to deal with all these students to provide them with everything that they need. So you have more to go with a least common factor, I suppose, and to deal with it that way, rather than to select the best student that you have and provide that best student with everything. I don't think anybody today would approve of doing things that way.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Roberts. I got introduced to fieldwork from undergrad, and I am very grateful for it because I think it helped me in the field. But as you said, not everybody definitely will be doing things in the field. So, and we have the issue of money. All right, so thank you, Clive.
No problem. So thank you very much, Daidrah, for handling that very relaxed and informative discussion segment. For those of you who are watching on Facebook, remember to stick by until the end. You want to wait until the end. We're going to give you an opportunity to join us live on Zoom. We'll give you the information at the end when we get to the Q&A section. We're just right now approaching the question and answer segment from the general public, and I'd just like to acknowledge that a few persons have joined in since we've been going on here. I see Professor Michelle DeGraff is in the house, joining all the way from MIT. Big up yourself, Prof. I see Kathy Ann is here, Carlos Rodriguez, James Murray, and Hazel Simmons McDonald is also here. If you don't mind, Joseph, I'd like to know if any of them have a question before you go on with your question, Joseph.
Okay.
If any of them have a question, you've been listening in. For those of you who joined halfway through or however long, if you have a question, feel free to unmute your mic and you can ask a question. I see that Professor Michelle DeGraff, you have unmuted your mic. Do you have a question or a comment or reflection, even on your own time doing field research or lexicographic work, whatever it is? Feel free, go ahead.
All right, so good to see you all. It's good to see Liz that I haven't seen forever. Good to see everyone. Peter, Joanne, Joseph, Clive. It's so good to see you all. Okay, so I won't spend so much time saying hello because I could do just that for an hour. But Liz, I have a question for you. So I'm very inspired by what you're doing, and it's kind of sobering, but also encouraging to hear that it's taken you 30 years to get to where you are now. And so in the past, maybe 5 years or so, 8 years, we have this project at MIT promoting the teaching of science and math in Creole. And we've done workshops in Haiti. We have a platform where we're gathering materials from teachers. It involves lots of co-creation. And very often, so in physics and math and biology and chemistry, we have to sometimes create new terms. And sometimes we borrow terms from French. Sometimes it makes more sense to get a term from English. Sometimes we have to take a French word and then change the meaning a bit to make it fit a particular concept in physics. And as we're doing so, we're collecting them online. So we have a glossary online that's very interactive, very dynamic, where we keep updating the entries. But what we find is that from certain quarters, even including from linguists in Haiti, there is some resistance to this process, right? They feel that dictionaries have to be more formal. So there's a sense that, well, if we collect terms the way we're doing it, very organically, very basically bottom up, then it's not the best way to go about it. It might actually hurt the students if they're using terms that are not quote unquote correct, that we have to respect the purity of the language. So it's a challenge because some of these folks are very vocal. They go into newspapers and make certain claims against this process. So I wanted to hear a bit of your wisdom around these issues, and what do you think as someone who's been doing that for years now? So what's your take?
Well, one of the differences, of course, between the greater Francophone milieu and the greater Anglophone milieu is that English people don't like to have rules about language, right? We don't have an academy. The Francophone milieu is much more used to the idea of there being an academy that sets down a rule. Now, you might be able to use that to your advantage. I don't know how many people are on board, and I know from looking at the history of the establishment of orthography for patois, it's not an easy thing, and there are still people who will fight to the death about OU versus you, Yeah. And I'm in the process of moi apprendre patois maintenant, and I'm as you can see getting interference from French, and the Haitians that I speak to will not allow me to say moi tini. I have to say moi gagnant. So there's a lot of problems within the language itself. But I would say that if you have some kind of systematic set of principles that you can say, okay, here are the 9 principles we're using. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We use English for this, we use French for this, we use Latin for this. If this is very, very popular and people know it already, we use it like this. If there's been citations like this, So that you have to have a kind of a grill of principe that you can look at. And people may not agree with them, right? But they will respect that and take it as if you have thought about it. And you're not doing this randomly or just by your own personal preference. That's one thing I would suggest.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I'm going to allow another 10 minutes in the Q&A segment. I think we started about 10 minutes late. So if there's anybody else to say, Marisol joining in. ¿Cómo está, Marisol? Joining in from Puerto Rico. Carlos, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question, Carlos? Go right ahead. Just, yeah, unmute.
Okay, hello everyone. This is Carlos. I'm originally from Puerto Rico as well, but I now work at the University of Aruba. I've been here for 2 years now. Some of you know me, some of you don't, so that was simply my introduction. And I had posted a question on the chat for Professor Peter Roberts. Nice to hear from you again, Professor Roberts. In terms of field work and how it has changed over the past few decades, I'm interested in this whole issue brought about by the IRB process. I find that there's a lot of young researchers who are actually not wanting to go into field work, or they feel discouraged from going into field work because, at least in our university, there are all these requirements about consent, and everything has to be reviewed by this, pre-approved by this board before you go forward. And if you make any changes at the last minute, which is bound to happen in real life-to-life interaction, you also have to take those changes to them and they have to reapprove it before you give it to the participants. Participants themselves can balk at having to sign something formal, you know, that they have to read. And I think that's something, it seems to me, I don't know, I'm asking you, right, that has changed within the last decade or so. And I wonder if you have some reflection on how you have seen this as a positive or perhaps not so positive development. I understand the spirit of this is to bring ethics to the table, and I support that, but it may have some consequences in terms of participation and in terms of willingness of researchers to go into fieldwork as opposed to something more comfortable that they can do at home using text. Could you perhaps comment on that, you or anybody else, perhaps? Thank you very much. I'll mute my microphone.
It never affected me. Hello, Michelle. It never affected me. And I see the problems that it will cause. I don't know, political correctness is part of the modern era. I don't know that you can do anything about it. It is a big problem if it is going to prevent you from asking your neighbor a question and then you can't use it to say anything. I don't really have any answer to what can be done.
Yeah.
Well,
I think I could chime in on what Carlos was asking, maybe just a little bit of information, Carlos. A lot of these ethics approval, at least the way that I conceptualize them, are meant to protect the informant, right? Especially if the person is a minor, especially the person belongs to a vulnerable community. You know, given that we are taking this information and we're going to publish it in a journal, and some of the ways that we solicit this information are by asking informants to give personal stories, right? Because anybody who has ever done research knows that it's not useful to go to a participant, an informant, and ask them, so tell me, how do you conjugate the verb in this language? You know, how do you form the past tense in this particular? That's useless. It's more useful to say, tell me about your life in this community. And those stories might be very personal. You might get sensitive information. I can tell you about a time, one of my earliest field research experiences was in Guyana. And Joseph was there at the time, and Joseph and I were doing research in Guyana. I was investigating the kinds of dopey stories that exist in Guyana. And Joseph wanted something about pronouns, so he just tagged along, right? And I remember we went to a house, And this was maybe like 12 p.m., like about 1 o'clock, lunchtime. And I was asking these people in Guyana, so tell me a duppy story. This is 1 o'clock, the boiling sun hot. Tell me a duppy story. And what a waste of time. What had to happen was that Joseph and I started to tell them our duppy stories from Jamaica. Joseph and I started to sing. We start dance. And like 5 hours later, we're tired and we got maybe 2 duppy stories later on. And a lot of these ethics, approvals and the hoops that we have to jump through are intended to protect the informers. Who knows what they're giving of themselves, and we need to ensure that we use it in a responsible way. I said, Daidrah, you have your hand up, and then I'll go to Lise. So Daidrah, just unmute, and then I'll go right to Lise.
Yes, Clive, I just wanted to add to what you said about the protection, especially since many of these communities already feel as if they have been used over and over and over and over, right? And therefore, without those kinds of protections, it's like you're allowing just about anybody to come in and take what it is that they want. Right. So the protection of the community secrets is a big thing as well, because you never know what can come out in a discussion with an informant, and there has to be something in place. So I understand that it might seem frustrating at times, but the reality is that if you find out what needs to be done early and start the process, then it shouldn't be a problem. I remember an incident in one of the communities because Professor Devonish had spoken to one informant before I went into the field. So the community I stayed in, I started going to that informant and just having conversations with her. And the Tusho, it was another outsider who came to me and said that the Tusho is very offended because I came into the community and I didn't see it as a problem, because I guess at the time I didn't fully understand the extent to the structure that they had, that I did not speak to her before I started interact. Not that she needed anything written, but to even come to her and talk to her about me going around the community. So, I had to just go and butter her up a bit after that to ensure that I could continue my field work.
Yes,
right?
yes,
But
yes.
those things are in place for a good reason.
All right, Lise, and then Joseph.
Yes, I have to say that I have a very personal connection to inappropriate research. My late father was a subject in the infamous Stanley Milgram obedience experiments at Yale many, many years ago. And that was what kicked off a lot of the move towards ethical review of experiments. So what I found in my research was that there were 2 sides to this. One, as you just mentioned, is convincing your informants to talk to you. And I think that there's no substitute for telling them what you're doing, which is, and you have to prove that. This is not just a come in one time and leave, right? You have to prove over a period of time that you are trustworthy, and that if they tell you something secret, that it won't get repeated. The other side is the university side, and that I found was actually easier. We developed protocols where I had to explain to people from the psychology department that we were not doing experimental research, that we were doing ethnography. Your best allies are people in anthropology and history, but that we would say, I will get verbal consent, I cannot ask people to sign anything. Now, in the Caribbean, it may be different with some minority groups, but certainly in Trinidad or Jamaica, people are not a captive population. They are not prisoners. They are not children. So when people agree to talk to you, they're going to talk to you as much as they're willing to. And you have to be able to prove to them, that you are trustworthy. If you are not, they won't talk to you.
Thank you very much. Joseph, and then I think Joanne, well, so Joseph, then Marisol. For persons who are in the Zoom chat and you'd like to ask a question, there's a raise hand feature. If you click your name, you should be able to raise your hand as well. So Joseph, Marisol, and then I think Joanne, you have a few questions from Facebook. We'll go to those questions. So Joseph, then Marisol. Go ahead, Joseph.
But also having a good sense of the community and your own personal responsibility to protect the members of the community who have decided to share with you. And a part of that understanding is that when you go in, you don't really understand their universe. They don't understand yours either. So when you walk in and say, okay, could I get your information? It's going to be a part of a study that I'm going to publish in a journal. I mean, this doesn't say much to anybody. And so I go into Canada to do work on Jamaicans in Canada. And this man is talking to me and he's giving me details about his immigration status at the time he came. Like, okay, you know, could we leave that out? You know, the responsibility is on me then to omit that from my corpus when I come to study it, so it doesn't get out there, because I don't know, you know, how many years afterwards something like that could haunt him.
Right. Thanks for that, Joseph. Marisol, go right ahead. Click unmute and just ask your question. Oh, you're unmuted now.
Hey.
Go ahead.
Hello, everyone.
Yes.
It's
Hello, Marisol.
fantastic to see all of you and to share in linguistics here in the Caribbean. Hi, Carlos. You're no longer here, but we're doing the same things. With this informed consent, I hate it. I hate it because we have to go over months and months of documents before we get the permit to go into the field. But once you do it, well, you know, you're fine. In my experience and going into my own community and how the people in my community receive this informed consent, they're like, but you're part of us, what you want that for? Or they're like, isn't the word good enough? So part of the old schedule I have to introduce, part of that, you know, time for them to see me, for them to know me, for them to get familiarized with a piece of paper before I ask them for their consent. I have spent hours and hours and hours, and I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of interviews that I cannot use because I didn't get their signature. Because anytime I show it to them or I would read it to them or you know, verbal consent and things like that, but at the end they were like, you know, you come from a university in the States and you want my signature, what you want my signature for? Then the experience they have with researchers from outside of the community, coming into the community, never asking for, you know, any consent. And then I come into my community and ask for the consent and they're like, what going on here? Why is it you asking for this? And such a person didn't come do nothing like that. They want to turn on the thing and, you know, take the picture and make the video. So going into my own community, I had to introduce into my schedule a lot of time to let them know what is it I'm doing, why is it I'm doing it, and where is the information going to end up, and then go back into the community and take the result of the research. I had to take my PhD dissertation house to house to show them, here it is. And they were happy. They didn't get a copy of it, you know, that is expensive, but they saw it and we took pictures together and I showed them into my dissertation. You know, you remember when you said this? I use it this, yes, but I don't see my name nowhere, no, because I'm protecting you. So it is very difficult, but it needs to be part of the equation. When we go into the field, you know, especially we only have certain amount of money and certain amount of time. And we want, you know, the first time I went to do that, and Dr. Faraklas, he laughed at me a lot because the first time I went to do research, I had this agenda. You know, every interview was half an hour and then 10 minutes to go to the other interview. And the first interview I had was with this older lady. She was 92, and she had me sitting down there for 4 hours telling me the story of her life. And I had to, you know, change the whole thing and just sit down there with her and listen to her and record her. And then I would turn on the recorder and she's like, no, man, me no finish yet. Me no finish yet. And, you know,
Wow.
I had things to do, but I had to, you know, respect her and respect her story and sit down there with her, down there with her. So yes, it's difficult. And, you know, in part of that equation, that 6 months of, you know, getting the permit, Carlos, we need to introduce that into the equation, the amount of time that we're going to need to actually have a conversation with the members of the community before starting the work that we have to do.
Thank you very much, Marisol. Hazel, I'm going to allow you to ask your question, Hazel, and then we're going to go right to the questions from Facebook.
No. Oops. I'm trying to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. We're hearing you. We're hearing you clearly.
Okay.
Yes.
Just a very quick comment on the last point being discussed, and then I have a quick one for Peter and one for Lise. When in doing applied research, it was my experience that if you're working with younger informants, participants, they made it easy by simply saying you have for the ethics thing, you have to get permission to work with human subjects. And then you could go to the organization in charge of those subjects, like a Ministry of Education, for example, to get permission to work with them. But you had to use pseudonyms to protect the identity of the children you were working with. So that took away a lot of some of the challenges that you were discussing a little while ago and made it easier to go ahead with the research, because there was always the assurance that you were not ever going to expose a particular child so that that child would be recognized. So that was one of the pluses that I found in doing applied research. My quick question for Peter. Peter, I remember when you became head, when you were head, I joined the department at Cable when you were head. There was these complaints from students, graduate students, that they were like lone wolves, what you described, and they didn't want to do research like that, and they wanted the support. And that had led us to develop a suite of courses, postgraduate courses, including field research courses that would help them to go into the field with more confidence. You've done a lot of supervision since then, and I was wondering whether you thought that introduction and that work that was introduced then would have helped to minimize the kinds of concerns you experienced as a lone wolf. That's your question. And Lise, a very quick question for you. You make a distinction between, or the need for observing the rigorousness of interpretation, and yet being open to change. What kind of challenge does that present to the lexicographer? And with updating information, given the time lapse between preparing a first dictionary and then having to do, to take account of all the changes that happen naturally with language. So Peter and then Lise, thank you very much. And it's good to see everybody. Thank you.
Same to you.
Well, as I said in my talk, I think the students nowadays are much better prepared to do the research in the field. And they also have this research methods course that gives them like a path to follow. So it would have helped me a lot, yeah, certainly.
Lise, you could go ahead with your question.
Yes.
The question of how you update things, you know, it used to be that the OED rule was that unless a word had been around in writing for 10 years, you couldn't add it to the dictionary. And now that is not only not true that it doesn't have to be written, it doesn't have to be longer than about 10 or 15 minutes that it's around before it gets added. I think there are two things. One, you have to keep in touch. And this cannot be done in a desultory fashion. I'm now trying to deal with all the stuff that people write into me and say, do you have this? Do you have this? And I am hoping that within the parameters of the digitized dictionary, that if I give the royalties and the copyright and everything for me to UWI, that they can help set up some kind of a permanent structure that can handle that, and where I would then leave it up to the linguists in the department to supervise the updates. But I think there would always have to be a first edition and then a constantly updated digital edition. It's not easy to let go of, but you know, you have to, otherwise it just becomes static. And as I said, people like updated meanings. Of course, most of the new words coming into Trinidad and Tobago these days come from either the United States or Jamaica. So that's why it's necessary to have some oversight. You can't just pour everything in, because then you get what I talked about with the amateur dictionaries. You just get stuff that's not very, very reliable.
Thank you. Joan, could you just unmute your mic and give us the 2 questions from Facebook? We're going to be wrapping up shortly. So if you remember what those questions are, I think you posted them in the chat room.
I have them.
Okay.
Kerry Belgrave is asking, please, how soon will the rapid developments / additions of Caribbean digital text jargon be included in future editions or revisions of Caribbean dictionaries?
As soon as we get it, as soon as we can put it in. I have no problem with that. If she should let me know any if she has some.
Okay, I'll tell her. And I think this next question from Nicola Quito in Canada is for either Liz or Peter or both. Are reports on the use and success of English Creole accessible, especially with regard to students who continue their studies in Canada and the US?
Reports on what?
The use and success of English Creole by Caribbean students in Canada and the US. I'm not sure if he's asking if, let me see, if it's like courses on Jamaican that Clive is teaching in Waterloo and Harvard, or if he's asking whether English Creole speakers have success in English in North American universities. So I'm not actually sure. I think he's a French speaker. Let me see if I can ask him.
Right. Yeah. So I think he might. So I'm looking at the question now, and I think it might simply relate to information in general about these Creole languages, their usage, their popularization, whether or not they're being taught in university courses, whether or not this is accessible or easily accessible to people outside of the Caribbean region. How successful have we been at doing things like that? Peter and then Lise, maybe. How closely would you say we're able to achieve that?
Work that we have done is accessible, is that it?
Yeah, essentially. If you were going to give it a mark, how accessible would you say it is?
It will become more and more accessible when it's digitized, but now, where you have to come to the library and look at it, well, that's still the old-fashioned method.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that, Lise?
Yeah, it's there was some interest in this area between, say, 1975 and about 10 years ago. And there were a number of publications from people who were interested in the education of Caribbean background students in North America, a movement that started actually in England. And it is not easy to get that information. It's much easier to get information about the Caribbean, but Caribbean students in North America or UK, there's been some by, for example, by Chandel Nero has published works on how Caribbean background students do at the college level. Mm-hmm. So there is some stuff, but you have to really track it down. Yes. And right now, of course, nobody's interested. I would say that living here in Quebec as I do, the question is not whether anybody can learn English, but whether the Haitians can speak proper French. And, you know, there's a popular lashback on that, which I'm very pleased to see.
Thank you, Liz. Joseph, you have your hand up. You'd like to comment on that question as well. Go ahead.
Yes, I was going to speak from my own fieldwork in Canada. So I can't really speak much to the education system, the reports I got, where that, it's not used in education. So as Liz pointed out, there was some work in the 70s and I think probably to early 80s, not much now. What I can speak to is use in the community and among friends, etc., especially in Toronto, that for Caribbean Creole languages, they moved from a situation of being marginalized by the speakers themselves. So when they entered, because if we're looking at the 1960s, 70s, many people then would have gone with not so positive attitudes to Caribbean Creoles.
Right.
Yeah. But what happened is that they were joined by a later generation coming in the 80s and 90s who were going to North America with more positive attitudes. And the important thing about that later generation is that they had continuing access to the language, which their parents didn't. First through improvements in telecommunications, and then through the internet with internet forums, and then social media, etc. And so nowadays, somebody born in Canada to Jamaican parents, to Haitian parents, to Trinidadian parents, has much greater access to Caribbean Creole languages, to the extent that they do not have to rely on their parents. So even in situations where parents try to limit their children's exposure to the Creole language, now the children don't need them at all. They can get it on the internet and through music.
Definitely, that is definitely true. I had an experience years ago when I was at York University teaching Jamaican Creole. I encountered a few students, young students, first-year students, who confessed to me. They say, "Boy, sir, I can't tell my brother I'm doing this Jamaican Creole course, She going to say I'm wasting her money. Why me waste her money? I take Jamaican Creole when she can't hear Jamaican Creole at home, when she can't hear Patois at home." And she said, "But I want to do the course." So I said to her, "You know what you should do? You should invite me to dinner. Invite me to dinner so that I can come and we have a coming out party. I take Jamaican Creole and I'm proud." That is what I told those students to do, because as Joseph said, a lot of these students, they're first, second generation Caribbean nationals, and they feel cut off from their culture because their parents came to Canada, came to the US, came to the UK, and they just wanted to assimilate. They felt that the best gift that they could give to their children is for them to completely assimilate in this society and, kind of cut off certain aspects of culture, when that is not what the children want. They grow up and they have this yearning to reconnect.
How important peer interaction is for these languages. And so I sat at a family gathering, this was Thanksgiving in Canada, and listened to children, and this was for several hours, who I knew spoke some amount of Jamaican, speak not one word of it. And it was months after that I figured that it was because their grandparents and parents were within earshot. But you take them on, so the grandparents and parents are talking, they're switching between English and Jamaican. The parents are speaking Jamaican, but the children aren't daring, but on their own, they will do it. And so you find that it's pretty much a peer-to-peer code. I see Liz with her hand up.
Yes, Liz, you'd like to join in,
I'd like to support that. Here in Montreal, we have an interesting situation where Montreal has the largest number of people of Haitian descent outside of Haiti. And Haitians in Montreal, by the popular youth culture, are considered the coolest immigrants of any except the Jamaicans. The Jamaicans come out at the top of the cool quotient, partly because they're more associated with danger. okay? Whether that's fair or not. Anyway, but the youth of Quebec, don't forget, they are not allowed to go, immigrants are not allowed to go to English schools. So you have people, in the French schools, the emphasis is on some kind of weird standard French, which nobody really speaks except some people. And the popular reaction of youth is, all right, you want me to speak that kind of French? All right, fine, I'll do that if I have to. But you know what? Outside of school, I am not speaking that. I am speaking the way I want. And you know, my French includes English, Haitian, Jamaican, anything I want it to. And that is the Montreal hip hop scene is amazingly multilingual. And when they want to impress somebody, they either switch the language themselves or they bring in a ringer. You know, we have one hip hop singer who's not really very good, and she tries to sing in Jamaican, but it's more like what we call Jafaican, and she is not well respected. But for instance, if somebody can't sing Jamaican themselves, they will bring a Jamaican to sing the verses, and then they will do the chorus. So to me, what that says is that there's a huge respect, and people from those communities, they don't just expect themselves to learn French. They expect you to learn some Haitian. They expect you to learn some Jamaican. I mean, if you're going to be with them and you're going to be talking to them, you learn it.
Precisely. Well, on that note, I see we're like about 30 minutes over our proposed ending time. But those persons who are on Facebook who didn't get a chance to ask a question, or the persons in the chat room now who didn't get a chance to ask a question, Kathian, Elano, and Patrice, I'm not sure if you have a question now. But guess what? There is going to be a second session today at 6 p.m. Right? Joanne, you have a comment? I see you raising your hand, Joanne. Okay, you're clapping your hands. Okay, right. But there's going to be a second session today at 6 p.m., 6 to 7 p.m. Daidrah will be coming back, and she'll be looking at a game that she and her colleague are, I think it's a game based on a Creole, right, Daidrah? And there'll be poetry as well. We'll be hearing from poets across the region. At least 2 poets will be sharing their poetry, stories, sayings from the Caribbean region, and we're going to have a game on display. It's going to be streamed live once again on Facebook. Joanne, you have a quick comment or question? Just unmute your mic and go right ahead.
Patrice actually had a question.
Oh, Patrice, yes, go ahead, Patrice. Just unmute. I didn't see you raising your hand. So unmute and then ask.
I'll say it. She said, what would Dr. Weiner's experience be? Sorry, just when I'm on. What would Dr. Weiner's experience, just in general, with the Caribbean plays and the sort of language items that are captured? What's interesting? What are your experiences with the plays that you mentioned that you're editing these, and the kind of language that you found, and what's been interesting and captivating and so on?
Well, I did learn a lot about language and culture from watching modern plays like Freddie Kissoon. These old texts, these old plays were prepared around 1838, and it's as Joseph asked, how do you find the links to the older forms? And what you're always looking for is missing links, that is intermediate forms between something you know now and something you maybe had before. Can you push it back? And one of the things is that, of course, you have a lot of archaic Creole language, but you also have archaic English language, or language that's military or governmental. So there's a lot to learn from them. There's a lot to learn. And one of the things that we've been doing is trying to figure out how you would stage some of these things. Because in today's climate, I don't think you could stage these as they were originally proposed to be staged, with white people in blackface playing black characters. I don't know, maybe you could. Maybe you could do something different. I think it would be a very interesting exercise to work on these plays in today's country?
All right, thank you, Lise. And thanks for that question, Patrice. All right, so we're wrapping up now. Thank you for those of you who joined in. Thank you again, Peter and Lise, Joseph and Daidrah, for participating in the first ever virtual language festival for the Society for Caribbean Linguistics. It will definitely not be the last. You know, we will try to make this an ongoing thing. And for those of you who didn't catch the entire session on Facebook, we're going to upload it to our brand new YouTube page. So many things going on. Oh my goodness, right? So
Instagram, we're on Instagram too.
We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter.
Facebook group, Facebook page.
Listen, we're going to find a way to beam SCL into your dreams. You watch and see, right? We're going to be everywhere.
I just wanted also to say that because we couldn't have a full face-to-face and even virtual conference, that we plan to invite other plenary speakers incrementally over time and spread it out over the next 2 years, actually, because when we have the live face-to-face one in Trinidad and Tobago in 2022, we'll be so well versed in all this digital stuff that by then it will be both face-to-face and virtual. But in the meantime, this is I think a wonderful start. I personally want to thank Clive and everybody on the exec, and of course Alison Johnson and Huron Works, who have been helping us with all the social media publicity and support and so on, and giving us our new image and our new look. We have a brand new website coming up too, Clive. So that's really important. A fabulous website. We're honoring our honorary members in a special way. We'll have Member of the Month. We'll have sociolinguistic and other linguistic country profiles, etc. That's coming soon. But just to say that everybody out there who is looking forward to giving a talk, just let us know. We'll start scheduling and all the way up to 2022. And then we'll have a big real live and virtual celebration on our 50th anniversary. It's a big deal. SCL 1972. We'll be 50 years old. Looking forward to the next half century and beyond. We'll meet on Dingoli and then we'll Ramaji. Well,
I'm young enough to be around for the next half century, so hey.
Yay!
You know.
I hope not.
In my 60s by then. Anyway, so
right.
thank you. Thank you all for joining. We're going to end the meeting now. Come back later on. You know, you'll learn a game, you'll listen to poetry, you'll hear proverbs, you'll hear sayings. So we're looking forward to seeing you at the session at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Jamaica time.
For those of us who are numerically challenged, just tell us how many hours that is.
From now?
Yes.
It's going to be another 3.5 hours.
Okay.
From right now. If you're watching right now, another 3.5 hours from right now, we'll be doing another session. And that session will be a shorter session, an hour, at most 90 minutes. We'll be playing games, doing poetry and so on. And there's going to be...
Is this available only through Facebook?
Well, yes, that's the only platform that we're going to stream it live. If you want, you could rejoin on Zoom later on. So that's up to you as well, Lise. All right.
Same link, right?
Same link, right? Same link. All right, everybody, take care. Keep safe. Wear your mask. Stay inside. Do what you need to do. And looking forward to seeing some of you at the second session or even tomorrow for the final day.